All right, welcome back, Gilbert students. We're going to continue our lessons on lesson 19, where we compare the North with the South, and we look at three main differences between them. In our last video lesson, we learned about the different economies that the North and South had. The North trying to become more of a factory society, and the South relying on slave labor. For today's lesson, we're going to concentrate on transportation used in the North and South, as well as the society, the makeup of the people of the North and the South. So let's get going. So transportation in the North and South. We're going to start with the North first. They relied on canals and railroads. You had a lot of people moving west, and we needed to improve transportation to get them there. The National Road is going to be created. It's going to be built in the north, and it's going to go all the way out to Illinois, and that'll be the first really major road built in the United States. But the North also relied on a lot of canals, and a canal is an artificial waterway that connects two bodies of water, and it's not the fastest moving type of transportation there is. I mean, in a canal, the boats are going to be pulled by horses. So a horse attached to a rope, the other piece of the rope is attached to the boat. The horse walks along, pulls the boat. So it's not fast, but what it did is it cut through different areas of the territories and the states. The quickest way somewhere is a straight line, and that's what canals proved to be, and I'll show you that in just a second. The steamboat's going to be invented by Robert Fulton, and the steamboat allowed travel of goods and people both upstream and downstream. We'll take a look at that as well. In the South, they relied on rivers. They're going to have some railroad track down in the South, but they're going to rely on rivers. They didn't want to build all those roads and canals. They thought that was a waste of government money. They said, hey, we got the rivers. We're going to continue to use these rivers. So let's take a look. So this is a canal back then, and what I want to point out is right here, you've got a horse. They have a rope right there. It's tied to the boat, and then the horse just moves along, and the boat follows with it. So fast? Definitely not. But did it save some time by going through different areas? It did. Let's take a look. This is the Erie Canal. It's the most famous canal that was ever built, and what it did is it was built right through the forests of upper New York, and it just went straight across. It connected the Hudson River with Lake Erie, hence the name Erie Canal. And what you do is they dug this big trench, and then once it was finished, the water from the Hudson River and the water from Lake Erie just filled it in. It's not moving water. It's just water. That's what a canal is. And what happened is along the way, along where the canal stretched, you're going to have towns being built. So that's how these towns came to be, because the Erie Canal brought goods and people through it. Erie Canal still exists today. This is a map that shows roads. Roads are in red, and you're going to see some roads in the north. You're going to see some roads in the south. Railroad track is in black, and you'll notice that the south does have some railroad track, but the north's going to have more because they needed when the goods were made in the factories, they were placed on trains and then they were shipped out west. But what you'll see in blue are the canals that the north also had. And you see no canals down in the south. So that was the transportation for both north and south. And then this is a map of the rivers of our country. And yeah, south has a lot. And that's what they wanted to go with. So let's take a look at society. What kind of people lived in the north? What kind of people lived in the south? Well, in the south, the society is broken down this way. you had plantation owners. Now, plantation owners, hardly anyone in the South was a plantation owner. They were in the minority. But they owned almost all of the slaves because the plantation could hold hundreds of slaves. But the plantation owners also had most of the political power in the South. So your governors were probably plantation owners. Your senators were probably plantation owners. And so they had all the political power in the South. If you were a farmer in the South, you hoped to own slaves one day. But most farmers did not own slaves. Right? After the plantation owners, you had small farmers. They owned one or two slaves. They had to work along with their slaves. And they always dreamed of making more money by growing more cotton, purchasing more land, and also purchasing more slaves. But most of your farmers, small farmers, owned one or two slaves, but most of your farmers in the South probably didn't own any slaves at all. Poor whites, they didn't own the land that they farmed. They rented their land, and chances are they had to pay for that land with a portion of the crops that they raised. They probably did not grow cotton. They wanted to grow cotton, but they were probably growing other things at the time. All right. So that's white society in the South. Let's take a look at free African Americans. Not all African Americans were slaves. Some were free. But how did they get free? Chances are that their relatives had earned their freedom by fighting in the American Revolution, and as a reward were either freed during the American Revolution or afterward. Another way they gained their freedom was by purchasing their freedom. In some cases, they could work. A slave could be hired out to work, and then when the pay came in, it either went to the owner, or sometimes the owner would let the slave keep some money, and after a period of time, that slave could pay for their freedom. There was also lotteries, believe it or not, and some slaves bought lottery tickets, and they won, and they used that money to buy their freedom. So you had free African Americans in the South, but they weren't wanted in the South. Most of your free African Americans were either in Delaware or Maryland. In 1860, 200,000 freed African Americans were living there. But like I said, they were not welcome in the South because white slave owners said that slaves needed them to look after them. That was their basis for slavery, that the white owners were needed because the slaves couldn't take care of themselves. Free African Americans in the South proved that theory wrong. So free African Americans in the South were not treated well. They could not travel. They could not vote. In some cases, in some states, free African Americans had to move out of the state, or else they would have been forced back into slavery or forced into slavery in case they had never been a slave. Because remember, slave owners said that free African Americans set a bad example. So let's take a look at the slave population. The slave population made up 1/3 of the entire population in the South. So 33% of the Southern population was slaves. And to control the behavior of slaves, slave codes were passed in the South. These were laws governing the behavior of slaves. What could they not do? All right? They could not meet in groups of 3 or 4. Or 3 or more. If they were meeting in large groups, the thought was that maybe they're planning an escape, maybe they're planning something. Right? They could not leave owner's land without a pass. If the slave was sent on a mission, he would have to have a written note from his owner explaining what he was doing. Couldn't own a weapon. You understand that, right? Slaves were not allowed to learn to read or write. They couldn't testify in court. If they're being mistreated, they had no recourse. They could not testify in court. All right? So this was how slaves' behavior was controlled back then. The Northern Society. In 1860, 7 out of 10 people lived on a farm in the north. It was still mostly a farming society, although there were a number of factories in the south. There were some large cities, but 7 out of 10 people still lived on farms in 1860. Between 1840 and 1860, the populations of Boston, Philadelphia, and New York tripled because immigrants were coming over from Europe to live in the United States. And pretty much they would settle in the cities where their boat landed because they didn't have a lot of money. They couldn't go and travel. They would stay in these border cities, and they would take any job that they could, and they needed to make money. In many cases, the men would come over first, and once they had enough money saved, they would then bring their families with them. Northern cities were now getting bigger. They were not very nice places. They lacked sewers, so there was a lot of sewage in the street, a lot of garbage in the street, and if you got sewage and garbage in the street, you're gonna have rats. It was not very pretty. Neighborhoods crowded and dirty, and when you got rats like that with sewage and garbage, there's gonna be a lot of disease spreading rapidly as well. Crime also was on the rise. Now, there were free African Americans in the North, but they didn't get to enjoy all the freedoms that Northerners did. Free African Americans in the North could not vote, they could not hold political office, they could not serve on juries, they could not attend white churches, they could not attend white schools. So, I mean, they might be free, but they were still very limited in what they could do, even in the North. So let's take a look at why the North had so many people coming in. We got to take a look at the immigrants that were coming in, and they were mostly from Ireland and Germany. Ireland was having a potato famine. Tons of Irish people were dying. They loved their potatoes. The potato crop did not, there was a famine, it was not growing, and so you could stay in Ireland and starve to death, or you could come to the United States for a fresh start. Germany was having a revolution. You could stay in Germany and maybe fight and die in the revolution, or you could come to the United States for a new start. So they came from other countries in Europe, but mostly from Germany and Ireland. But what brought people to the United States? It's something called push factors. It's going to push them out of their country to the United States, and there's 5 of them. First one is population growth. In Europe, the population was growing. People were living longer, and they were running out of place for these people. The cities were crowded. The farms, if a man had 3 sons and the man dies, well, who gets his land? The oldest son. What about the other 2 sons? They're out of luck. Now they could stay on their land, or they could come to the United States for a new start, which is what the agricultural changes is. Back then, landlords would own a huge piece of land, and they would rent it out into smaller pieces to farmers. But what they discovered was they could grow more food if they kicked the small farmers off their land, and they could grow more food and sell it. But what happened to these farmers now? They don't have any land to farm. You go to Europe. You go to the cities. Cities are crowded. These farmers decide they're going to come to the United States and get a fresh start. Crop failures, as I told you, the potato famine in Ireland, that crop failure caused many Irish to come over to the United States, and the Irish were not wanted. Industrial Revolution. A lot of people back then, they specialized in things. You needed a suit of clothes, you went to a tailor. You needed a pair of shoes, you went to a cobbler. You got a quality product, but it took a while to make, and it was expensive. Now factories are being built, they're making these shoes and they're making these clothes. They're doing it way quicker, they're doing it way cheaper. These people are now out of work. Come to the United States. And then the political revolutions, like I told you, in Germany in 1848, a lot of people came over because they didn't want to take part in the revolution. So these are push factors. They push people out of their country And now let's look at some pull factors. What did the U.S. have that pulled these immigrants to the United States instead of other parts of the world? Well, there's three of them. First one is freedom. The United States offers more freedoms than any other country in the world. You come over here, practice any religion you want. You can start any business you want. All right? So there was a lot of freedoms that people wanted. Economic opportunity. You can come over, start your own business. You can come start a farm. You can come work in factories. You had many different economic opportunities that you could take advantage of in the United States that were not available to them in Europe. And then abundant land. We've got millions of acres out west just waiting for people to come out and start farming out there. And so freedoms, economic opportunity, abundant land were pull factors that pulled people from Europe to the United States. So today we looked at the society of both North and South. We looked at transportation of both North and South. There's a quiz coming your way. You know that's happening. Use the textbook, use the Google Slides, watch my video again. Need any help? Please let me know.